wine industry does this all the time. X is like Y, but if you don't know what Y is, you're lost.
X becomes meaningless.
Yes, and so I first decided that I would never do that. If I couldn't describe a wine, then I would just lay awake at night until I could.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 11th episode of the Innerversal podcast, where every episode intersects psychology with another topic. In this episode, we'll be discussing psychology and wine with the amazing Karen MacNeil. Karen has taught wine's connection to culture and place through Stanford University's Continuing Studies program, founded and taught the Culinary Institute of America's Rudd Center for Professional Wine Studies in St. Helena, California, which is one of the top wine education programs, is the editor of Wine Speed, a digital wine intel subscription, and the author of The Wine Bible, a best-selling testament to why she's the only American to have won every major wine award given in the English language. Karen, it's an absolute pleasure to meet you.
Thank you, Samuel.
So your 90-page introductory chapter, Mastering Wine, alone is 90,000 reasons why someone should purchase your book. From understanding the attributes, the 12 attributes that make great wine great, to understanding different soils, to how different sensory neurons work and how fast they operate. My question for you is, can you introduce us into what led to your journey into the wine world and into writing what French inventor Jean-Charles Boisset called the very best book ever written on wine?
Well, thank you. As you can imagine, it was not a weekend project. In fact, the first Wine Bible took 10 unpaid years to write. It turns out the world is a big place, but I had started out in New York. I live in the Napa Valley now, but I had started out in New York as a young woman trying to be a writer, and I collected 324 rejection slips, which I thumbtacked to the wall of my fifth floor walk-up. And one day I had what I thought was this brilliant idea that I should try, because I was writing about, politics and women's issues and poetry and all kinds of things. But I had this brilliant idea that I should try writing about food, because if you wrote about food, maybe they gave you samples. And I was on food stamps at the time. So this was my brilliant way to improve my diet. And so the first article actually I ever published was on food. It was on butter, and it was published in the Village Voice. And I if you're a writer, you just need that one big break usually. And so the Village Voice was that for me. And over the next several years, I became a pretty well-known food writer. In fact, I was writing for the New York Times Magazine on the one hand and Playboy on the other. And those two were sort of in the 1980s, the epitome of places you could write for. The New York Times because it's the New York Times, and Playboy because it paid so much. So anyway, I realized after a number of years that what I loved wasn't just food. It was sort of the whole world of gastronomy, dining behavior, the invention of manners, of course, all of the critical beverages in civilization. And the four big beverages of civilization are coffee, tea, beer, and wine. Those four beverages tell the story of every civilization. And, coffee, tea, and beer, you can study. You can read a lot and have some command of them. But wine was different, and wine was hard. Most of what was written about wine in those days was written by British authors. These were very big, dry treatises on and it was really show-off wine writing. Here's what I know, and here's what I'm going to get to taste. And here I was still then, a young woman in New York without much money, not enough money to buy wine, really. There were no classes in wine at that time. And trying to read these pieces that, among other things, the Brits assumed a familiarity with European geography that most Americans like me didn't have. I'd be like, Meursault, Montagny, Macon, where are these places? Are these places? Or maybe they're grapes, I don't know. So a friend of mine, there were tastings that were done in New York, but only for this very insular and select group of men who met every week to taste all the great wines of the world, and producers from all over the world would fly in to do tastings for them. And one of these men was a friend of mine, and he knew how much I wanted to learn about wine and taste it. And so he asked the others if I could join this group. And the answer came back, yes, on one condition. And that was that I not talk. So I was thrilled. A woman today might be, horribly offended. But for me, I didn't want to talk. As far as I was concerned, I didn't know enough about wine to give my opinion. But I wanted to ask questions. And because I could not ask questions, I more or less had to figure out wine by myself. And I also knew all the idiosyncrasies of wine that make no sense, the logical questions that you would have. And that became the basis for the Wine Bible, which I originally wrote in a sense just for myself to try and figure wine out. Little did I know it would sell now a million copies.
That's amazing. Even having the patience to essentially sit in the room and not discuss any of your own opinions. I'm sure it sort of created this kind of, I guess, this potential energy. It also allowed you to kind of think and consider and contemplate and sort of weigh your growing understanding against everything that you're hearing in the room. I feel like that's part of what created that potential energy that yielded this monument.
Yeah, it was, I would do it again in a heartbeat for two reasons. One is that I adopted these men, I adopted their behavior, and in a good way. They were very serious. They were quiet. They took notes. They had a reverence and a respect for wine that I sort of inculcated. And in those days in New York, you went to a tasting dressed up. Men wore ties. Women wore, stockings and heels. I live in California now, and people show up to a tasting in a black T-shirt and shorts. I still have to wear stockings and heels. But the other thing, though, was that not being able to talk, even to ask questions, forced me to have a kind of mental intimacy with wine. I had to figure it out for myself. I had to think about, what did I really think? And how does one even come to having an opinion about something that is so seemingly ungraspable and so difficult to write about? It turns out that wine is 10,000 times harder to write about than food.
Absolutely. You mentioned in your discussion with Nick Setterberg with Google Talks last year that you didn't really have necessarily a writing instructor or even like a writing mentor, but you did perhaps facetiously mention that if you had to choose one, perhaps Ernest Hemingway might be one. And Hemingway is obviously known for his super condensed, sort of stripped down writing in comparison to, let's say, his rival Fitzgerald, who, if someone was hurting in a story, the male would be, he would be agonized by the 1,000 tears of da-da-da-da-da, whereas Hemingway would just write, he was sad. And the imaginations would have to rely on the imagination of the reader. And your work is pretty famously accessible and approachable. Forbes described your book as engaging and conversational. I personally see it as intimate, as if you're having sort of a fireside chat with someone who just so happens to be a grandmaster in their field. My question is, what do you attribute your success to in regards to specifically your writing style?
I work really hard at being a good writer. It's as important to me to be a good writer as it is to know something about wine. And when I was writing the Wine Bible, I had read so much about wine that I didn't understand. I would just, the second paragraph and I'd be lost. Because wine, a lot of wine writing is also something that I refuse to ever do in writing or verbally, which is to be internally referential. So this is the way the wine industry keeps people out. You'll have a group of, for me in those days, a group of men, and they would say something like, oh yes, this Bordeaux reminds me actually of the 83 Vieux Telegraph Chateauneuf-du-Pape. Don't you think?
Yes, my absolute favorite.
Yes, knowing full well that I had never tasted the 83, Vieux Telegraph Chateauneuf-du-Pape. But the wine industry does this all the time. X is like Y, but if you don't know what Y is, you're lost.
X becomes meaningless.
Yes, and so I first decided that I would never do that. If I couldn't describe a wine, then I would just lay awake at night until I could, and do it in beautifully rhythmic but simple sentences, so that the reader found the topic is complicated, as you said. So the writing cannot also be complicated. If the writing is complicated and the topic is complicated, forget it. Nobody wants to read it. But I wanted to write a book that was very personal, that was sometimes funny, that poked fun at myself as much as anyone. And people tell me all the time that they feel like I'm in the room with them and you can also pick up the Wine Bible anywhere. Almost no one reads it from page 1 to page 700. You just pick up anywhere, and there's some fascinating thing you didn't know on page 577.
I have to say, though, even though you don't compare X wine to wine Y, the eccentric wine Y that only few people would know, you do leverage a lot of absolutely beautiful metaphors and similes and analogies that I think are excellent at sort of yielding approximations. Can I read 3 that really stuck out to me?
Sure.
Okay, so the first one was, tasting a complex wine is a head trip. Just when you think you've grasped the flavors, the kaleidoscope turns and new flavors emerge, revealing different facets of the wine. So I love that, because again, it creates this sort of like synesthetic approximation, and it's so accessible and so simple and so beautiful and just imagistic. I love it. Here's a second one. Drinking Gamay, the red grape of the Beaujolais, is like diving into a pool of black cherries and peaches. And of course, that got me hungry. And then the third one, which is, I love this because it's funny, it's a little cheeky. With wine, as with women, there is very little meaningful information one can deduce by looking at the legs. And I didn't even know about the idea of legs with wine, and sort of the myth that you're trying to undo, that the legs, the way that the wine leaves sort of those liquid impressions, that has something to do with the quality of the wine. I had no idea, but now I know it. And making that sort of comedic metaphor has very much sort of made it stick, because we learn through sort of one of the best ways to learn is obviously through some sort of social reinforcing, and when you have this comedy, that very much makes it all stick.
Oh, thank you. Somebody has to lay awake at night thinking about how to describe these things, and I guess it's me. But with food, you have the food itself, or just the story of the food to make you hungry. You know, you can say, I'm standing here stirring this thick pot of blackberry jam. And I mean, pretty soon someone is right there with you. They can smell it, they can almost taste it. And wine, you know, you have this static wine bottle and wine in a glass. You have to somehow use metaphor and simile because there is nothing else. There is no actual language for wine. Food is its own inherent language. If you give someone a strawberry and you say, what does this taste like? They say, it tastes like a strawberry. Great. It is a strawberry. We agree that it tastes like a strawberry, and we call that strawberry-ness, strawberry flavor. But if you give someone a vermentino and say, what does this taste like? And they say, it tastes like vermentino, it's not helpful, right? Because wine is not its own inherent language in the way that food is. So wine is much more reliant on affective metaphor and simile. That is all there is.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I mean, it kind of reminds me of the quote by Sigmund Freud that analogies don't teach anyone anything new, but rather make someone feel more at home. I think without those sort of approximations and those analogies to make people feel at home, it would be such an uphill climb, especially for something as expansive and complex as sort of capturing wine. And I think it's, again, one of the reasons for, you know, lack of a better word, you've created a very friendly and lovable book.
It is a friendly book.
Yeah, and a lot of these metaphors and similes are these approximations that rely on a very natural familiarity. And again, I think it's just amazing, especially when you're trying to work with perception. And perception is such an interesting topic because perception is both shared, and it's something that's inimitably unique. We all have our own individual perceptions. I think of the quote by the English neurologist, Dr. Oliver Sacks, who said in his book Musicophilia that perception, every act of perception is an act of creation. And I think that there's this in every single type of perception, there's this gargantuan sequence of events that occur, and that the minute individual components of that perception is different. Every single minute component, from the number of rods and cones in people's eyes to the angle in which they see it to how they juxtapose it with their previous memories, that color, that experience. So for someone like you and for sommeliers and any other wine experts, what exactly can you do to essentially, you know, refine and develop your palate in such a way that you can perceive wine that is excellent?
Well, you know, first you have to make peace with the idea that you're going to be on that gerbil wheel your whole life. And you're not, and it's going to be a happy gerbil wheel. So the big, you know, it's no trouble. The biggest problem is you're going to have to taste a lot of wine.
Yeah, I drank 3 bottles of wine just to prepare for this interview.
Good man. There you go. But I was probably 55 before I ever let anyone even describe me as a wine expert. Now, admittedly, that might say something about me because there are plenty of people who at 24 will tell you they're a wine expert. But, you know, I guess there comes a time, in fact, I remember for me the time that sitting in a restaurant with a small group of other people, the bad thing about knowing even a shred about wine is that everybody hands you the wine list. So this was always a moment of like, oh no, I mean, I don't want to be the one choosing. And what if I don't know these wines? But I remember very distinctly being in my early 30s and we were in an Italian restaurant, and Italian wine is the worst. I mean, it's delicious, it's the best. But to understand Italian wine, oh my God, the Italians they're full of chaos. Delicious chaos, that's Italy. And I looked at this wine list and I thought, I know what to do. I know these wines. I can describe these wines. And that was a great moment for me. I mean, I didn't say anything to anyone else, but it's a little bit like, I don't know, doing anything. Maybe it's that 10,000 times rule where all of a sudden you're playing the piano or you're hitting a tennis ball or something and you realize, I know how to do this now. So there is a moment when you realize, I'm okay at this. I know something. I want to go back to something you said, though, about metaphor and simile, because what is also, all of those things start with research and start with how you view the world. So, for example, the example I like to give is I was in New Zealand doing research once, and I said to the head of New Zealand Wine, their trade board, how many winemakers are there in New Zealand? And she said, I don't know, 100, something like that. And when I got back to the States, I looked up how many sheep are in New Zealand. And I thought, this is going to be an interesting fact. I wonder how many sheep there are in New Zealand relative to winemakers. It turns out there are 5 sheep for every winemaker in New Zealand. And that's a perfect wine Bible little thing in a caption or something. And so a lot of my writing has to do with just the simplest things that fascinate me. And whenever I taste a New Zealand wine, if I'm, somewhere in a restaurant, I'll say, do you realize there are 5 sheep for every winemaker in New Zealand? People will be like, wow, that's really good. That's cool. That's interesting. So my head is just packed with those kinds of small points of culture, small points of the world around us. But you have to if you are a good writer, I think you have to be, even though your world is solitary, you have to be deeply fascinated by the world around you.
So you have to be perceptive, in love with whatever the subject matter is, and be ready to tap into that 10,000 hour rule where essentially you develop this sort of automaticity with whatever it is, whether it's art or singing or playing an instrument or wine tasting, and being able to discern good, great, exceptional wine, and obviously the nuances between this excellent wine and that excellent wine, and being able to describe them, of course.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I realized in the first edition of writing the Wine Bible was that, surprisingly enough, no one had ever written on what makes great wine great. And originally, I was going to start the book with Bordeaux or Champagne, go through France, then go through Italy, and so on. And right then, I changed and said, this is astounding. That's the most primary question anyone who's a wine drinker has, is how do you know if a wine is great? Everybody wants to know the answer to that. And so that began my very deep, now 25 years of thinking about, well, what does make great wine great? If you ask a literary critic what makes a book great, they can tell you both sort of objectively as best they can, as well as subjectively, what they think great books have had throughout time and throughout place and throughout various cultures. And so I had to begin to figure that out and start there, because that's the most fascinating thing for readers to know.
When you first thought of, or when you first decided you were going to approach that question, were you intimidated at all by the sheer magnitude of that question and the fact that no one else had sort of encapsulated that yet?
Sure, but this is like a classic me. Just give me something that hasn't been done, and I'm all in. I mean, I might be afraid, but a lot of the projects I've done, I started the Culinary Institute of America's wine program, for example. Nothing existed before that. And I love stuff like that. I love, you know, let me dive into this black hole of nothingness and make something in here. And it may take me a while, but I'm not easily, I don't know, put off the chase.
I love that. So, zooming out from the experts and sort of encapsulating the masses, I want to ask a broader question, and it's kind of grounded in a variety of different ideas. So, in 2007, researchers from Caltech and Stanford University did this study where they had individuals drinking different types of wine, and they were assigned to basically rate them by which they thought was the most pleasurable. And so one of the things they did is they also were basically strapped to fMRIs, functional magnetic resonance imaging, where essentially there would be these brain scans where you would be able to see neuroanatomically which parts of the brain were activated. And one of the things in this experiment was that there were two pairs of wines that were the same. And wine one, for example, would be either $5 or it would be $45. And then wine three would be either $10 or $90. And what they found is not only did they enjoy the wine when it was more expensive, but they also had greater activation in a part of their brain that was sort of responsible for sort of detecting pleasure, which is the medial orbitofrontal cortex. And like as a seemingly unrelated connection, I think of in 2018, Kylie Jenner, the Kardashian socialite, posted on Twitter this one post, or I guess now X, posted this one post where she was basically lamenting an update that Snapchat made. And overnight, Snapchat lost $1.3 billion. 2 years later, Cristiano Ronaldo, at the Euro 2020, there was a can of Coke in front of him, Coca-Cola, and he moved it out of the way and just said agua, agua, because he's a very healthy person who wants to maintain that his physique. And overnight, Coca-Cola lost $4 billion. And it makes me sort of wonder, how do you think cultural, societal, biological, and even biographic components or factors like memory impact or influence the way in which we have preferences or attitudes towards
Well,
wine?
as you pointed out earlier, price certainly does, and there are lots of variations on the example you gave. But remember, and at least once a year, some magazine is going to say, we gave a bunch of tasters $2 Chuck and Chateau Lafite, and they couldn't tell the difference. I mean, you can count on that article being rolled out and redone at least once a year. But the truth is that phenomenon is true for all kinds of things. If you have someone standing in a room on an Asian carpet, and you say, this Asian carpet costs $50,000, or this Asian carpet comes from Wayfair and it costs $100. If you're not an expert on Asian carpets, you'd be like, ooh, this $50,000 carpet is really beautiful. Or for that matter, cars or computers or almost anything. So we are, I think we are naturally swayed in all kinds of fields by wanting to experience something great. And we associate price with greatness, not just in wine, in any given thing. Is that bad? I don't know. I mean, to me, I don't think it is bad. I think it's, price is given no other information. Price tries to be a helpful indicator of when you are experiencing something great. Are there other things like that? Well, if you've read Charles Spence, who wrote the book Gastrophysics, Charles Spence is a PhD at Oxford. There are all kinds of ways we can manipulate perception to make people experience something greater. Sound is certainly one of them. I mean, among his experiments were having a seafood restaurant pipe in just very faintly the sound of waves. And it turns out that you rate your shrimp cocktail higher when you hear the sound of waves in the background. Another one of his that I love is he was able to modify somehow the sound of Pringles potato chips. And the people associated that they gave the potato chips a higher rating the louder the sound of the crunch. So yeah, it just goes to show that all kinds of things in our environment can influence our emotional, our sort of limbic system about how we and our mental grasp of how we experience the world. Is that a bad thing? I think it's a good thing. I want to experience things deeply and well. So if somebody wants to play waves and make Pringles crunchier, fine by me. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I guess it reminds us that experience is a layered thing, that there's so many different factors that comprise a single experience. I mean, I think of the experiment constructed by Elizabeth Latfus, who basically participants were watching cars crash, and they were asked how fast they thought the cars were driving, and then how fast the cars were zooming versus how fast the cars were, let's say, drifting. And in each of these different descriptions that they gave to the participants, the verb change, the change of the verb would change the way in which they approximated the speed was that the cars were going. By the way, how do they make the Pringles crunchier?
I don't know, but I think you would really like the book, Gastrophysics. He's written other books as well, Charles Spence. He also did it with color. It turns out that we find the color red. We associate red with both sweetness and intensity. And, the first client who understood this, in a sense, is Coke. Coke doesn't have a blue can. It has a round red can.
I am maximizing my sweetness.
Oh, I see. Good. Okay. Very good. I like it.
So in your interview with the Black Wine Guy, which is a fantastic name, by the way, in your discussion, you mentioned what makes wine come alive is culture, food, history, religion, art, and all the cultural stuff around it. And it's obvious from your book, you have a whole chapter on ancient wines, and obviously a tremendous amount of descriptions from the locations and everything from topography to just literally everything that one can think of. As an Armenian, obviously, my introductions to wine were based on our own culture, and Armenia has a huge history with wine. From Noah's Ark, when Noah landed in Mount Ararat, which is part of ancient Armenia, one of the first things he did was plant vineyards. And I think of that Armenia has one of the first vineyards or the first wineries. And, now Armenia is obviously having a wine boom because of distributors like Storica, which, now they've, partnered with Carnival Cruise Lines, and these wines like Zulal and Kush. My question is, you cover so many countries, so many cities, and you've tasted, at least 10,000 wines. Are there any places from around the world that have, surprised you, that have kind of blown you away, that kind of changed your expectations and just basically was noteworthy in how they surprised you?
Well, first of all, bravo on Armenia. Armenia is the mothership. It is where wine began, for sure. And second, actually, I've tasted over 100,000 wines, 10,000 just for this last book, the Wine Bible. most of which were tasted during COVID, which, as it turns out, wasn't a bad way to spend COVID. Um,
I'm sure many other people were tasting wine,
yeah,
but perhaps less academically.
that's true. Yeah, they weren't taking notes. I was taking notes. But anyway, yes, the place that I'm endlessly fascinated by from a psychological standpoint is Champagne in France, because here you have, a beverage that is widely associated with joy and happiness and celebration and sophistication and all those things. And yet the people in Champagne are kind of, they're not exactly, I mean, depressive would sound like too big of a word, would be too big of a word, but they are, they're in northern France. They're very hardworking. They're very insular. They have a severity about them, a sadness about them. And some of this comes from the fact that even just in the last century, Champagne was devastated in both World Wars I and II. People lived underground for 3, 4 years at a time. Children didn't see outside for 3 or 4 years at a time. They lived in what are known as the crayères, these chalk pits that had been dug out from under the Champagne region by the Romans. In fact, much of the beautiful limestone in, let's say, Rome comes from under Champagne. And the Romans left behind these big underground pits, which is, and tunnels between them, which is where the Champenois lived during both wars. And so it's interesting because here you have these very serious people with not they're not a happy joie de vivre kind of culture, and yet the wine is that way. So I always find that very fascinating, just to think about how the impact of the world causes so many things, including causes, how big world events can have an impact, even in how we view wine. In this case, it's the opposite. They made a wine that was so beautiful and celebratory, almost in spite of themselves, and in order to make money, and initially, and then they became very good at that. But they themselves are a humble, hardworking, almost sad group of people.
Interesting. But that's not the stereotype in which they're perceived.
No, not at all. But that's why it can be really interesting to go to a place, right? Because you begin to see wine in a context of its people, and sometimes it's reflective of those people. Like Napa Valley, where I live, the wines are very reflective of the people. The wine producers in Napa Valley are, they're bigger than life in a way, and they have a gargantuan appetite for life, and they make wines that are kind of big and expressive and rich and intense, and that's reflective of their ambitions and the way they go about tackling life. So it can be really interesting to visit wine regions, and you have to be on the lookout for little hints. They're usually everywhere about why a wine tastes the way it does.
The resilience of the people of Champagne is interesting in that it's almost sublimation, like the defense mechanism where you take sort of the crappiness or the sadness or the anger and you convert it into something else, whether it's poetry or exercising or anything of that sort, where you convert that negativity into positivity. So speaking of that sort of resilience, You have psychologists from William James, the first, basically the pioneer of American psychology, to more modern names like Dr. Angela Duckworth, talk about the significance of resilience and grit. My question for you is, what if someone is writing a book, and like you, it's year 7 and their friends are even questioning its existence, their first edition, and they feel like they're almost like running out of steam. What advice would you give to that individual? And as a bonus, what would you like that book to be about?
Well, I feel like I can tell when a writer is serious, because serious writers don't keep walking around the edge of the pool. They get in the pool, and they may stay on the shallow end for a while, but they get in the pool. And I think the hardest thing for many people is that, I don't know if it's fear or what it is, but they will keep walking around the edges of an idea instead of doing it. And I mean, people have asked me sometimes, do you ever get writer's block? And I say, no. And they're like, wow, that's great. I'm like, no, I say I will not let myself get writer's block. Maybe I'll give myself one day, and then the next day I'll say, okay, that's it. Now you get back in the chair and get at that keyboard. And so I suppose it takes the ability to say to yourself, how important is this to me? And if it's important, then keep going, damn it, and do it. I know it's like, it sounds like just say no or something. But I really mean it. There is no easy path to being a writer. It's a hard thing. It's a solitary thing. It's full of rejection. And when people reject it or aren't happy with it, it's you that they aren't liking, because it's you on the page. But I still think you should keep going, because no one can ever take that away from you. Once you do that, no one will ever be able to take that away from you. And that takes a kind of resilience and, in a sense, self-respect to do. And you can feel proud of yourself after that, even if no one reads your book. And what would that book be about?
Would it be the coffee Quran, the tea Torah?
Yeah, yeah. I did not name the wine Bible. Do you know this story? Yeah, I mean, when my publisher told me that the book was going to be called The Wine Bible, I said, absolutely not. And my publisher said, what do you mean, absolutely not? And I said, it's too big of a name. It's too grand of a name. And he said, well, you didn't really read your contract, because right there in the fine print, it says that, and this is true, authors do not have final say on the title of their books, because the title of the book is considered part of the book's marketing, not part of its subject contents. So it was the Wine Bible. But could I write the Coffee Quran? I don't know, maybe. Sometimes I wish, in fact, I'm really terrible when I have to call, like, Apple customer service or any kind of computer help, right? And people will say, well, just do this. And I'll say, wait a minute. What's a browser? And they'll be like, oh, come on, lady. You know what a browser is. The browser. I'll be like, no, if you know your stuff, you'll be able to explain it to me. And someone will get, a little sort of like testy. And I'll say, listen, I have taken the subject of wine, and for 1 million people who maybe didn't understand wine very well, made them feel like and not only feel, but they really now know something. If I can take a subject like wine and make it knowable, and by the way, if you want me to, Mr. Apple tech person, I can teach you about wine right now, right here on the phone. So let's just turn the binoculars around and you start at the beginning and tell me which buttons I need to press and how to figure this all out, right? So occasionally I feel like I wish there was the Wine Bible version of technology, opera, I don't know, how cars work,
Wow.
a million things, because I would read the Wine Bible version of anything.
The car version would be so cool. That would be so cool. I mean, I'll say this. Your book has genuinely been an inspiration for me. I mean, I'm trying to write a book that sort of covers a huge swath of psychology and takes different fields from subfields from neuroscience to cognitive behavioral therapy to psychodynamics, and kind of converts them all into chapters that are focused on utility, how you can use them in your sort of everyday life. And I'll say sometimes it's very intimidating, but when I see what you've done, I'm genuinely motivated. I'm sincerely inspired to be able to complete something like that, because psychology is complex, but obviously wine is such a complex thing as well. And to describe it the way you do in such simple and accessible ways, it's, you know.
That's exactly right. And don't think about, I mean, just when you described your book, I thought, wow, that is big. That's tackling a lot. And you have to have an extreme amount of expertise, I'm sure. But, you know, if you think about how big that is and how much you have to know, that'll stop you in your tracks because it's just a huge undertaking and a huge goal. So what I would say is, you know, think small. Think, okay, it can be chapter by chapter, or it could be concept by concept. I'm just going to explain complexity here and not get overwhelmed with the wines of the world. If I thought of it as the wines of the world, I truly might have stopped myself, because I was thinking, I let the enormity of the project be front and center in my mind instead of this small handleable goal. Right now, I'm going to explain cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, and what that is, and how you can manifest it in everyday life or whatever. Yeah. And then you just put it all together, and then you think, whoa, okay, there it is. I got the big book here.
So it's sort of like taking a brick by brick approach instead of, you know, focusing on the cathedral, which would intimidate you, but you have to fall in love with the actual process of bricklaying. Speaking of projects in the future, the future is genuinely difficult to sort of predict, considering just how many things are happening, and sometimes everything seems hyper novel, where there's so many variables kind of interplaying with one another that it's genuinely hard to kind of keep track of even the near future or even the present at times. Artificial intelligence, for example, and social media and even our like shrinking attention span has transformed the ways that, you know, advertisements run, that political campaigns are created, even the way in which psychological questionnaires are delivered. They have to be shorter and shorter to sort of match that attention span. And it makes me think of in 2014, there's a study from the University of Sussex's Sackler Center for Consciousness. And what they found is there's a lower amount of gray matter in the anterior cingulate cortex, which is a place, a brain region that's responsible for emotional and cognitive sort of reappraisal of our experiences. And it's correlated with sort of the amount of sort of media technologies that we use, from different smartphones to different social media platforms and tablets and things of this sort. A year later, Microsoft did an interesting study where they found that sort of direct default human attention has decreased from 12 seconds to 8 seconds from 2000 to 2013. And, you know, it just makes me wonder, for someone like you, what trends do you see, be it social, cultural, even ecological, that you feel might transform the way in which we grow to appreciate wine in the not so distant future?
Boy, it was so sad to hear what you just related. And it rings true to me that that would be the case. But 12 seconds of attention span wasn't that long to begin with. So the idea that it's shrinking down to 8, it certainly has, it has destroyed wine writing, really. Wine doesn't lend itself to short little things. So there are lots of just pictures, I suppose, of wine bottles on Instagram. And it's really worrisome. I do think that there may be help, or at least helpful lessons in any purely sensory thing. Eating, listening, tasting wine, things that give you so much pleasure and that encourage you to sort of spend time doing them, spend time thinking about this wine that is in your mouth that is just so magnificent. I don't know. That is really worrisome because it's
If I can help, I do believe these things sort of pendulate. I do believe that there are some things in life that are continuous and some things that sort of shift back and forth, that they sort of equilibrate. And I believe there are right now, there is some evidence to show that it's kind of going the other way. I mean, there's social media apps now that sort of will condense all the different things happening and will sort of block it all out and convert everything into just articles that focus on, the arts, on sports, and do so in articles free of distractions, free of advertisements. And it's kind of like we're kind of going back to reading newspapers now. I do think it's changing. It has
I'm
to.
so glad. Yeah, I guess the only thing we can all do is take responsibility for our own self in that, right? And decide that some things we really are going to invest time in. We aren't going to just flit from thing to thing to thing. I say that although I'm staring down at my desk with all of the things that I kind of go through so fast in a given day. But I think I'm going to read this email slower when we're done.
Well, I mean, please maintain your insane productivity because it's so impressive.
Can I tell you about something that I am doing right now that I'm really proud of?
Yes, of course, please.
Speaking of kind of Instagram, in January, I did a video called Why I Hate Dry January. And much to my surprise, it got about 17,000, shares and likes and not likes and commentary. And the first comment was from a sommelier at a famous restaurant who said, Karen, I love the Wine Bible, but on this, you are dead wrong. People should take a break from wine. And in fact, and a lot of the sommeliers I know are participating in Dry January. Anyway, as all this conversation starts, whipping around through Instagram, at the end, I said, there are 3 things that I find disturbing. One is that the narrative around wine has devolved to just being a story about alcohol. And to me, wine is more than alcohol. It's history and religion and art and culture and sociability, and it's threaded into,
Like the resilience of the people of Champagne that you had mentioned.
That's right. It's threaded into a bigger tapestry. And 2 is I think that Dry January and movements like it have taken on a self-righteous tone, which I think is misplaced. And then 3, For 9,000 years, wine has been a beverage that brings people together. Friendships are formed around it. We've all had the experience of tasting wine or sharing wine with someone who we didn't know. And by the end of the evening, you are that person's friend now. And wine has had this positive societal role for thousands and thousands of years. And why is someone not telling that story? So the next morning, I'm walking the dog and I'm grumbling to myself, the wine industry should be telling this story. And then I think, well, you're a word person. You should tell the story. And so it popped into my head something that has now become an enormous success and reality, a nationwide campaign called Come Over October. So during the month of October, wine drinkers now all over the world actually are going to invite a friend, a colleague, a family member, a neighbor to come over and share some wine in honor of wine's historic role as a beverage that brings people together. So in the 800 total wine stores across the United States, you'll see Come Over October promotions. Everyone from the Champagne Bureau to the Napa Valley Vintners are doing Come Over October events. Our rideshare partner is Lyft. Lyft will be giving discount coupons to anyone who uses Come Over October in there when they sign up to get a Lyft ride. We have literally thousands of wineries across the country that are doing Come Over October events and tastings. So it's really, and in fact, we've been invited to appear before the Congressional Wine Caucus in Washington at the end of September. So it's big, and I'm donating all of my time to it, and I'm both stunned and I don't know, very pleased.
I know that I just said that trends are either continuous or they're sort of pendulating back and forth, sort of between two extremes. But I have to say, what you're doing is incredible. I'm just so blown away by this Come Over October. I think. I mean, if people are drinking to the point in which, it's an excess and it's debilitating to their health, then I guess something like Dry January could potentially make sense, and they probably have much bigger problems to worry about. But with Come Over October, I think sort of offsetting that trend where you're just drinking to get drunk, I think is amazing. It's this movement away from that and more towards drinking wine wisely, being smarter about it, being social and amiable and communal about your wine experience. Whether you are on a trip in, let's say, Argentina and you're in Mendoza enjoying a Malbec, or you have friends coming back from India and they're showcasing an Indian wine for you. And, vicariously, you're learning about the culture through the experience of you sharing it. I think this is amazing. This is the exact sort of swing away from those quick little tidbits of information and kind of flash pangs of micro experiences that I genuinely think people are getting sick of. Even the youth, I think, are getting sick of it. And I think it's amazing. So it's Come Over October.
Yep, Come Over October. And you'll begin to see the hashtag Come Over October. We have a website, www.comeoveroctober.com, which has all kinds of ideas about how you might celebrate Come Over October, or events you can go to. There's a button there that will tell you events being done all over the country that you can join in on. So yeah, it's pretty cool. And it's sort of taken on in just the last few weeks, just grown exponentially in the US, so much so that we now have various parts of Italy, the Chianti Classico producers, the Sicilian producers, the Prosecco producers are all also doing come over October events. Wines of Chile, wines of South Africa. I mean, it is now kind of blasted open to be international as well. So yeah, it started one morning walking the dog.
That is fantastic. And I have to say, I am so grateful that you chose my birthday, my birth month. I think that was very sweet of you
You're welcome.
to definitely, use my birth month.
Don't worry,
Why?
the royalty check is in the mail.
Amazing. Is there any reason, besides it being my birth month, is there any reason why you chose October?
Because it rhymes with come over.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Why not?
There you go.
Yeah. That and my birthday. That's exciting. It's 2 months
Yeah.
away.
No, it is also true that 40% of wine sales, at least 40%, it varies somewhere between 40 and 50% of all wine sold in the United States is sold in October, November, and December. So October is a great month. It's starting to be cool in most parts of the country, and people do drink wine more and buy wine more in October, November, and December. So I wanted to do it in the fall.
I like October too, because if October, November, and December are the times in which most wine is purchased, choosing the earliest month is good because it kind of sets the tone. It sets the tone for how people hopefully will be drinking more wisely, not just for, the alcohol buzz, but rather because, they're engaging in that genuine socializing and sort of understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You've mentioned that you didn't originally pick the name, the Wine Bible, but clearly with over 1 million copies sold, the name works. So my question is sort of an Old Testament question: is if you had to have, not 10 commandments, but some commandments, a few commandments to help guide absolute newbies, people who are complete amateurs and sort of new to it, how they can grow to appreciate wine responsibly, what would be some of the commandments you would provide?
Yeah. Well, I don't like the term newbies because we are all, the reason we love wine is because it's this endless, as I wrote, it's a sort of this endless head trip, and you never do know it all. So we're all in the same boat there. But I would say two things. One thing I did as a young woman that sounds kind of goofy, but it really helped was I had a boyfriend at the time who was a lawyer, and a young lawyer. He had more money than me, but he also wanted to learn about wine. And so every Friday night for a year, we would just choose randomly any place in the world that we'd heard of, but we didn't know the wine. So Grave in France. And he would go to the store and buy 3 Grave wines. And I would just sort of decide that, I don't know, I'm going to make whatever, beef stew or something. And we would get out Hugh Johnson's Wine Atlas, and we would open the Graves, and we would sit there and kind of taste them and talk to each other about them. We would read out loud whatever Hugh Johnson said about Grave, even though we didn't know, couldn't really figure out what he meant. And then when we would have dinner, and we did this for a year, and it was amazing how much we taught ourselves just by doing that every Friday night. And at the end of the year, we're like, wow, we know about these places now. And the key was having fun together, talking out loud to each other. Well, I think this wine has whatever, lemons, even though that seemed a little goofy. And reading out loud a little paragraph on where Grave was and why it's important. So I would do that with doesn't have to be a boyfriend, obviously. It could be a friend, any kind of a friend. And then the other thing is, I think when people buy wine and they want to learn about wine, there's nothing more intimidating than, and it could be digitally, like wine.com, or an actual store. You go in and there are 7,000 selections, and you're like, well, I don't know, I just want a wine for dinner, right? And so you somehow, little things tip you off. You like the way this label looks, and you buy this wine, and it's a pretty random decision. I would say that the better way to go about that would be decide on some place in the world. It could be any place, Spain. And for the next 2 months, only go to the Spain section and only buy Spanish wines. Whatever wine you want to buy, but only from Spain. And then at the end of 2 months, choose another place in the world, South Africa, okay? And only for 2 months, only drink South African wine. And if you do this for 2 months, going to a different place every 2 months, again, you'll wake up like a year from now and you'll be like, wow, I actually know something about Spanish wine, about its flavors. And I actually know something about South African wine, its flavors. It's when you have this scatter shot, just buy any bottle, that it's hard for your brain to make sense. There's no patterns there. So your brain doesn't make sense of these millions of data points that don't fit into any kind of categories. So, if you take just the slightly more organized approach to your buying by only buying from one area at one time, it's amazing how much you'll just through flavor absorb, intellectually absorb.
I think that's how I'm going to start. I know you said generally your book doesn't have to be read cover to cover, but I think I'm going to be one of the few people who reads it in that sort of sequential way, because obviously you can open your book on any page and find yourself in a land and just dive into how the wines are appreciated there, and I think that's awesome. But I think I'm going to do sort of your approach, and I'm going to start with where you started in your book with Bordeaux, and just go with straight Bordeaux and try and really just jump into that. Is that a foolhardy approach?
No, that's great. I mean, Bordeaux wines are beautiful and lovely, and when I'm writing, actually, I try to only drink wine of that place, so that I'm sort of feeling the flavors of that place as I'm writing. And it's a good thing to do. So you can read a little snippet from the wine Bible while you're drinking your Bordeaux.
Absolutely, yeah. And thank you again. This has been such a good time. Thank you so much for coming on and discussing psychology and wine.
Thank you. I have really enjoyed it as well. Thank you, Sam.
And the absolute best of luck to come over October. I think that's the coolest thing ever. I 100% am participating in that, and gonna bring all my friends to participate as well. And how else can sort of people, I was going to say, where can people find your book, but your book is everywhere. So
yes, I mean, you can certainly, buy the book in any bookstore or on Amazon, or buy it from us. You can go on my website, Karen MacNeil and Company, and that way I can sign it. Thank you. There's the wine Bible. So I'm happy to sign it and personalize it if you go on the Karen MacNeil website and order it. But on Come Over October, if you go on the Come Over October website, there is a button there called Local Wine Events. And you just click that, put in where you are, Atlanta, Georgia, Dallas, Texas, wherever you are. And it will tell you Come Over October events that you can go to in that area. But it can also just be you and your friends, right? You can just decide, in your case, to have a come over October birthday party and invite a few friends over and share some wine.
I love it. I love it. And the people can contribute to this, as in, different restaurants and things of that sort, like bars, cafes. Can they join in? How, like, what is the way in which they can reach out to sort of like host an event?
Definitely. Yes. Wineries, well, a lot of wineries are already participating, and we are working hard to get restaurants to participate as well. And restaurants are a logical place, right? To, come on over to XYZ restaurant to have dinner together and share some wine. So we've begun to talk to restaurant associations around the country who also love this idea. And we have created assets that are on the Come Over October website. So things like, our logo, posters, table tents, all these things are free to use, because Come Over October is, it's a international campaign, but it's not meant to make money for me or my two friends who are helping me with this. Um, so we've created these things that anyone can use. So if you're any kind of a business, you can absolutely have a Come Over October event.
Thank you so much again for this. This has been such a great time, and I can't wait. I'm gonna email you once I'm done with France, and I'll tell you my thoughts. And again, thank you so much for everything. And again, great luck with Come Over October, and I honestly can't
Great.
wait for it.
Absolutely. All right, Sam, thank you. Definitely email me. I want to keep in touch.